Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first ever virtual exhibit opening at the Concord Museum. My colleagues and I here are thrilled to be opening these incredible new permanent galleries. Our exuberance is tempered only by the fact that so many of you can't be here to join us for our normal opening celebration. But we hope that you will come visit soon and often with your friends and family. I know that you will love this show. So let me just give you a general overview of how the show was designed. First and foremost, we highlight the iconic artifacts that are part of the museum's world-renowned collection, including, of course, the lantern that signaled Paul Revere to begin his ride. Over here we have the tread on which the person who hung the lantern would have climbed the stairs to hang it in the North Church. Those artifacts are then augmented and really brought to life by a number of animations. Behind me is a map that was developed by J. DaCosta in 1775 to report back to London to the King what happened in this engagement. And our colleagues at Richard Lewis Media Group have brought that map to light so that you can see in a short span of 5 to 6 minutes the 24-hour span of engagement between the British regulars and the local militia. The entire exhibit was designed by our colleagues at Amaze Design, and it's built really around the engravings of Amos Doolittle, who came to Concord just days after the engagement to record what happened on April 19, 1775. But once again, through 21st century animation, we bring those engravings to life. In a moment, my colleague, David Wood, the curator here at the Concord Museum, will bring you to each corner of the exhibit and give you a sense of how those eyewitness artifacts are laid out in front of these animated Doolittle prints. We're incredibly honored to open this evening's virtual ceremony with remarks from General Joseph Dunford, the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As he explains in his remarks, General Dunford was born in Boston, grew up in Quincy, and has a great love of American history. As you know, we opened the exhibit just today on Veterans Day, and General Dunford provided these remarks as we welcomed veterans and active service personnel for free and exclusive admission today to the museum. Immediately following General Dunford's remarks, our curator David Wood will give you a brief highlights tour of the show. And that will be followed by a few other comments from our curatorial associate, a couple of our board members, and then our board president, Ralph Earle, and I will deliver toasts.
Few dates in world history are better known than April 19th, 1775, when a group of embattled farmers, locally trained militia, and Minutemen exchanged fire with what was then the most powerful army on earth. They were defending their community, their sense of liberty, and their ideals of self-government. I'm honored to share in this celebration of a new exhibition that tells this foundational story in dynamic, engaging, and inclusive ways. I salute the museum for choosing to open these 3 new permanent galleries on Veterans Day and for inviting local veterans and active duty personnel to be the first to have exclusive access to these exhibits free of charge. President Washington spoke about the willingness of future generations to serve, being informed by the manner in which we treat our veterans. I'm sure President Washington would approve of how the museum is bringing that sentiment to life. Throughout my career in the military, from serving as a platoon commander through being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I've always been proud of my Massachusetts roots, having been born in Boston, the cradle of liberty, and growing up in Quincy, the home of John Adams and his family. We remember, of course, the names of revolutionary leaders like Adams and Hancock and Revere. But it's equally important to recount the actions of those who led men in battle, those who fought on the front lines, those who were wounded, and those who made the ultimate sacrifice. I hope all those who visit the museum are inspired by the stories of our founding fathers and reminded that we came together in 1775 in order to form a more perfect union. A more perfect union that would allow all citizens to enjoy the blessings of liberty, regardless of race, class, or creed. I hope all those who visit the museum are also reminded of our responsibilities as citizens to protect our proud legacy of democracy and pass it along to the next generation of citizens. Let me close by commending the curators and the fabricators who have brought our history to life. And in advance, let me thank the educators who will use this museum to tell our story to the next generation of citizens. God bless America and those who work to keep our nation strong, safe, and united.
The first of Amos Doolittle's 4 engravings of the events of April 19th depict the common at Lexington, where the first firing took place that day. And we have, I would say, a living representative of the day here in John Buckman's clock. So this 8-day clock made by Nathaniel Mulliken in Lexington for John Buckman, who kept the tavern in the center of town, that shows up right in the middle of Doolittle's engraving. And this clock was there, ticking, as it is still ticking now, keeping good time, while the 60 members of Lexington's militia waited for the regulars that they knew were on the way, but they didn't know where they were or when they were going to arrive. So waited out these pre-dawn hours to the sound of this clock. And then in time, just at dawn, the regulars arrived. This is the musket of one of them, the musket of an officer who served throughout that day. We don't know what officer it was, but it was a weapon just like this that was turned on the 60 members of Lexington's militia on the common. And nobody knows quite how it happened, but firing broke out, and 8 of the Lexington militia were killed instantly and a number of others wounded. I'm at the case that has the objects associated with the center of Concord on April 19th, including some of the supplies that were the very target of the regulars that day. The 2 powder horns were retrieved from the mill pond in the middle of the 19th century, where they very evidently had been thrown by the regulars, that according to their orders, just throw the ammunition into the pond. There are 3 of the wooden spoons there that had been stored in Concord, were issued during the siege of Boston, carried by men of Captain Miles' company. Those are the tip of the iceberg. They represent literally hogsheads full of wooden spoons intended for an army of 20,000. There were tons of supplies stored in Concord, just a mountain of material, and very little of it was discovered by the regulars. One element that was found was some of the ammunition in the center of town. These 2 cannonballs were thrown into the mill pond and were excavated in the 1850s, where Henry Thoreau and others immediately recognized what they represented. And that was their orders from Gage that day, was to throw the musket balls into the water, throw the cannonballs away, and to burn the wooden things. So there's an entrenching tool here, a shod shovel that's got a specialized metal edge to it for digging ditches and raising ramparts. There were barrels of these shovels too. They were in the townhouse and were set on fire by the regulars. This was the conflagration that the 73-year-old Martha Moulton witnessed and did her best to remedy, because the townhouse, I think Martha knew, had a lot of gunpowder in it too. So it was a very dangerous moment, and these objects were witnesses. The third of Amos Doolittle's engravings depicts the firing at the North Bridge, and all of these artifacts were there at the time, including a piece of the bridge itself. This was excavated in the middle of the 20th century, but interestingly, it was David Brown, the captain of one of Concord's minute companies, who had worked on the bridge in 1769, so perhaps David Brown actually worked on this very piece. and the bridge was also in David Brown's front yard. The two muskets one is from a Minuteman from Acton, one a Minuteman from Lincoln. Both Lincoln and Acton had responded by the very early morning and were waiting in Wright Tavern in the center of Concord for the provincials to arrive, training as they waited. This is also Samuel Dakin's powder horn. The Fowler is Samuel Dakin's, this his powder horn. The flints come from the field just above the North Bridge, and they are among the 100 or so that were discovered in two lines in the 1930s, and the archaeologist who found them correctly surmised that the waiting provincials who had been drawn up in two lines by the adjutant of the day, Joseph Hosmer. The Minutemen were in one line, the militia were in one line. They were ordered to change their flints. They dropped their flints right at their feet, and that's where they stayed until 1934 when they were rediscovered. There are two swords here as well, also from men who were at the bridge. One of them is John Hayward's sword. John Hayward took over command of the Acton Minute Company when, in the first round of firing, their captain, Isaac Davis, was killed. I'd mentioned that this action was taking place in David Brown's front yard. It's also the front yard of the man who gave the order to fire back when the provincials were fired on by the regulars. That's John Buttrick, and these are his pistols, and it is his house that is on a little rise right over the river. You can see he's just a few hundred yards away from where this event took place. I'm standing by the case where we've gathered the objects associated with the latter part of April 19th, and they're clustered around Doolittle's fourth image. And I wanted to look in particular at some of the objects that reflect the level of commitment that was everywhere in the field that day. So for instance, the long musket and powder horn are Roger Brown's. He marched from Framingham to get to Concord not long after noon, so a long, quick march. Even longer march by Ezekiel Marsh, who owned this watch. Ezekiel Marsh was from Danvers. Danvers got the alarm about 9 o'clock in the morning, immediately mustered and set off, and we're in Arlington, some 26 miles away, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just in time for many of Ezekiel Marsh's colleagues to have gotten involved in the dreadful fighting at the Jason Russell House, where a dozen provincials were killed, including 4 or 5 members of Marsh's company. And maybe even the most touching example is the British officer's sword. This is a sword of an officer in one of the silver-faced companies, one of the companies with silver braid on their uniforms. And there was no such officer captured or killed in Menotomy in Arlington in the afternoon. So it certainly appears this was picked up by a young boy from Watertown that afternoon. It looks like the officer simply discarded his sword and his musket. His musket is also in this gallery. Really an indication of how desperate the situation was for the regulars in the afternoon.
So I joined the museum board 12 years ago. Churchill Franklin, the then president of the board, asked me to come on and to chair a strategic planning effort. At some very basic level, the new galleries on the second floor are the centerpiece of the new museum. They represent the events of April 1775 in a modern way that pays full attention and credit to the importance of those events, both in American history, but also to the individuals who participated in them. Jane and I talked about this quite a lot. It's been our privilege to be supporters of the museum for longer than a dozen years. And as we were thinking about the gallery, we were thinking about the issues that are important to us and to our children. It is not Jane's and my gallery, it's our family gallery. And one of the things that I have loved about studying history is the untold stories. The little things about people who aren't necessarily in all the history books that are seminal and central to the events that occurred. And so we wanted to dedicate the gallery not only to the famous people, the Buttricks, the Barretts, but also to the people whose names we don't know, to the people whose names we may know but aren't celebrated. Prince Estabrook, who died on the green at Lexington, the two men who died at the North Bridge, the British soldiers who died at the North Bridge. Those are all very, very important parts of the story, and we want those stories to be told as much as the role that Concord played in the early days of the American Revolution. The Concord Museum has been around for over 100 years. It is a really important part of the town of Concord, but it's also important nationally. The objects we have are of truly national importance. And the opening of these galleries, as well as the galleries in which I stand and those that will follow, represent a rebirth for the Concord Museum. We view ourselves in service to the community and to the nation now and for generations to come.
Concord has been the epicenter of American history for generations, and the Concord Museum has been the steward of some of the most important artifacts representing the history of Concord and the United States for over a century themselves. As exhibit designers, we get to work with lots of different museums across the country, but nowhere have we been able to work with more important artifacts and stories than at the Concord Museum. The April 19th gallery is really a treasure in that it tells the story of this important historic day that affected not only the folks that were involved that day, but really the generations that have come since. So everyone is involved and everyone is affected. The museum holds a collection of artifacts that are representative of the people involved, which is most important to us as exhibit designers, to be able to tell the stories of those people. And through those artifacts, we're able to really live the events of that day and also see how the echoes of that day have carried forward to generations today. We've had the privilege of working with the Concord Museum for many, many years, and one of the things we love about working with this museum is the dedication and scholarship of the staff. Every meeting we have is an inspiration and a new insight. We absolutely love to discuss the objects in the collection that they have, and we can see in every conversation the reverence that they have for the things that they care for. The April 19th gallery is really a jewel in the crown of the collection, and we think that this will serve to expose the museum to a more national audience, one it really deserves because it does have the seminal Revolutionary War collection in the United States.
Hi, I'm Sarah Smith with RLMG. I'm the project manager for the media for the April 19th gallery. And I had the great fortune of working with a wonderful team here at RLMG of motion graphic designers, sound designers, graphic designers, and our creative director. And together we worked with the Concord Museum staff and Amaze Design on this really unique opportunity to tell the story of April 19th with their collection and with these historical assets that became the base of our media. We made 5 pieces of media. One of them, the sort of showcase piece, it uses a map from 1775 that was made to tell the story of the day. And at the urging of Amaze Design to really use it as a projection surface, which was a wonderful idea, we trimmed out some of the key features of the map and use it as a projection surface and add a lot of delight and detail with the media. We really turn it into a world and bring it to life in a way that we think the map makers would have wanted to do themselves, but didn't have the technology to do it. The other 4 pieces that we do use historic prints by Amos Doolittle, and it was really fun to work with those because he was really trying to take a snapshot at different moments in the day. And what we do is unfurl those snapshots. We combine them with first-person quotes who are like describing what's actually happening in that freeze frame. And we cut out details, we enhance the beauty, we draw your eye to certain focus points, and we turn them into little stories. One of the challenges was not to overpower the wonderful, amazing collection. So with the Doolittle print pieces, they're very subtle. In the gallery, they do a perfect job of just breathing a little life into the space and helping situate those objects.
My name is Robert Monroe. I am a member of the Board of Governors at the Concord Museum. I'm also co-president of the Robbins House in town, which is this beautiful building behind us. The Concord Museum and the Robbins House have, for quite some time, been very good partners in telling Concord's history, including Concord's African American history. It's with that in mind that I'm really excited to share some information about the museum's new April 19th, 1775 exhibition. The exhibition aims to tell the story and events of April 19th, 1775 through the words and belongings of those people who participated in the day's events. The artifacts that we have will serve as witness to the day's events. Mostly, these artifacts tell the story of the most powerful members of 1770 society, landowning white men. Finding artifacts from women and less wealthy members of society are harder to track. This is especially true of African Americans and people of color in society at that time. This exhibition educates visitors on the many African Americans who were present and participated in the events of April 19th. We've woven their stories into every level of our interpretation. Approximately 40 people of color served the provincial cause on April 19th, 1775. A broadside published after April 19th lists the wounded and dead from each provincial town. Prince Estabrook, identified as a Negro man, was included on that list and was one of the men wounded at Lexington Common. In our first focus gallery, The Revolution at Home, visitors will learn that pre-revolutionary Concord was home to approximately 24 enslaved men, women, and children. Concordians were full and eager participants in a global trade network that relied on the labor of enslaved people. Material culture analysis powers our interpretation. Through it, we gain insight into 2 people of color who fought for the provincial cause, Peter Salem and Philip. Most provincials carried powder horns into battle and had them decorated by master carvers. In this interactive station, we introduce visitors to John Bush, a free man of color from Shrewsbury who was a master of this art form. Bush served with the Massachusetts militia during the French and Indian War. While stationed at Fort William Henry in the 1750s, he carved intricate horns that inspired a generation of artisans. We tell John Bush's story while displaying powder horns from our collection, one of which was carved during the siege of Boston. We hope you enjoy the exhibit.
Hi, I'm Erica Lum, the Peggy N. Gary Curatorial Associate at the Concord Museum, and I'm standing in front of the Barrett House, where on April 19, 1775, approximately 100 British regulars came in search of military supplies stockpiled by the Provincial Congress. Rebecca Barrett was there to greet them. Rebecca Barrett was one of the many women who were there on April 19th and whose stories we are including in our new gallery installation. Using the Barrett House door, Hannah Hunt's shoes, and other artifacts, we are able to provide a more inclusive look at April 19, 1775, and women who stood their ground in the face of opposition.
It is particularly fitting that we open these galleries on the eve of Veterans Day, as they are a testament to the first Americans who gave what Abraham Lincoln would call 88 years later, the last full measure of devotion, for the then revolutionary ideals of liberty and democracy. While the nation we now know did not exist in April 1775, it was a dream embraced by those who fought on the North Bridge and on the Battle Road, a dream that required vision, sacrifice, commitment, and just plain hard work. My wife Jane and I are honored to dedicate this spectacular new gallery, and it says so on the plaque outside, to the men and women of Concord and its neighboring communities who sparked the American Revolution, both those whose lives are celebrated and others whose essential efforts often remain untold. I want to dwell on that last part for a moment. While the stories of Colonel Barrett and Major Buttrick are well known, as are the later heroics of General Washington and Ethan Allen, less celebrated are the names of the 8 who died on the Lexington Green that morning and the 2 who died at the North Bridge. Even less well known is that one of the casualties, Prince Estabrook, was a black man. Nor is it well known that there were 9,000 black patriots who fought in the Revolutionary War. It is about these oft-told and oft-untold stories that these galleries enlighten us. The Concord Museum is committed to telling the story of our town and its role in the American saga fully and completely in a way that celebrates both the events and the people that are well known and those who much of history has forgotten. I am often struck by the stakes faced by those who fought on the North Bridge that day. Not only were they putting their lives at risk, each and every one of them was committing treason, a hanging offense in the British Empire. They were risking their families, their worldly goods, their futures. They did so consciously and with forethought, seriousness, and bravery. We owe them our present and our future. So I'd like to close with a quote and a toast. While most of us remember Arthur Ashe as a barrier-breaking tennis player, he was also an Army veteran who once said, "True heroism is remarkably sober. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost." So let's all drink a virtual toast to those who worked and sacrificed to make these galleries come to life. The donors, the Board of Governors, the staff, our dedicated partners, those who've come before, and all who united in the desire to build a new museum that will serve our community and others for generations to come. Cheers.
Of course, any exhibit about April 19th, 1775 is about beginnings. And I recall when my family first moved to this area from Western Massachusetts 20 years ago. It was during the summer of 1999, and it represented a fresh start for us. During the next spring, we witnessed our first reenactment in Lexington and Concord, and the nation was commemorating the 225th anniversaries of those battles, so we didn't realize that the extravaganza was bigger than ever that year. And for our 5-year-old son, Gabe, who as a child never met a stick that he didn't turn into an imaginary weapon, much to the chagrin of his peacenik parents, this was akin to Revolutionary War nirvana. A short while later, a tomboy in his class named Rachel was dropped off at our house for a play date, and we heard Gabe say, "Ever been to a reenactment?" as he enthusiastically trotted off with her into our backyard in search of fallen branches. Phyllis and I imagined we had just witnessed our son's first pickup line. The list of individuals responsible for us being here today is too long to enumerate, beginning with the embattled farmers whose ranks in our dynamic new account are found to include women, children, and people of color. But let me mention first and foremost our indefatigable board president, Ralph Earle, who spearheaded our successful effort to raise the funds necessary to design and install these new galleries, and his wife, Jane Mandello, who has been a key partner, counselor, and shared benefactor in this effort. It is only fitting that their name should adorn the archway that stands tall at the entrance to this magnificent new permanent gallery, much as the famous Rood Bridge still arches the flood of the Concord River. And as we've just heard from Ralph, the Earle Mandillo family flag unfurls to the breeze of inclusivity, and we thank them for their commitment to the telling of oft untold stories of heroes and patriots long overlooked by standard protocols. Now, I sometimes script myself too much on these things, but I really do just want to say, Ralph, what a pleasure it is to have worked with you, and really no one is more responsible for all of us standing here today in this glorious room than you, and we are deeply, deeply in your debt. Back to our exhibit, where we tell the story of the outsized role that Concord played in world history. Things were truly never the same after the shots that were fired just steps from where we stand. And with the creative use of eyewitness artifacts, first-person narratives, and dynamic interactives, we are telling this story like it has never been told before. One imagines Amos Doolittle turning in his grave, less out of shock than thrill, I hope, as his engravings come to life through the miracle of 21st century technology and animation, wondering if he too, like a modern Messiah, might be risen from the dead, just as his iconic images have brought the battles of the North Bridge, the arrival of the troops in Concord, and the first skirmish in Lexington to life. And it was on that neighboring green that the all-too-young veteran of the French and Indian War, John Parker, dying of tuberculosis but brimming with vigor, ordered his troops to stand their ground, quote, "Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." For months, we've been heralding the exhibit is coming, the exhibit is coming, and while thankfully it arrives without portent of musket and fireball, it is an auspicious moment for the life of this museum. For if we mean to transform this institution, representing the history and soul of this community, let it begin here. If we mean to welcome legions of visitors from far and wide, and lifelong learners from toddlers to retirees, let us begin here. If we mean to recapture the ideals that our forebears so courageously fought and died for in this battle and all those that followed in our country's proud history, let that begin here too. And if we do so, hopefully years from now, after having visited our museum and tasted its wares, bright-eyed children with gleaming imaginations will encounter their friends outside our doors and ask, "Ever been to a great exhibit?" And they will then head into this and other galleries to begin and cement a love affair with this country and all that it stands for, and which, over the past 2 centuries and a half, many have fought and given their lives to maintain. So I too raise the uncorked champagne bottles down below. They represent a sense of possibility and potential to the Concord Museum and this transformational moment in our ever-evolving history. Cheers. Cheers. That concludes our first ever virtual exhibit opening. I'm so pleased that so many of you could join us this evening. I should note that I am in the final gallery. This is the gallery where we talk about the legacy of April 19th, 1775. It includes, of course, the famous Minuteman sculpture from Daniel Chester French, and explains some of the iconography behind the actual sculpture. I'm especially fond of the last text panel and photo. It has to do with the dedication in 1875, and there's a somewhat blistering quote from Louisa May Alcott. She attended the dedication of the Minuteman sculpture. No seats were reserved for women that day, and she talks about a day of reckoning to come to ensure that all of the citizens of our country get the same rights that were fought for on that fateful day in 1775. The revolution continues. We hope you will come and see the exhibit. We hope you'll bring new generations here to learn these important lessons as our country continues to try to form a more perfect union. Thank you so much, and good evening.